Saturday Night is a comedy about the night the famous late-night comedy show made its debut. It's a very lively movie, but the tension it strives for is pretty mild. Let's talk about it. In this movie, we follow Lorne Michaels, played by Gabriel Abel. In the 90 minutes leading up to the premiere of his variety sketch series, he has to go around the studio at 30 Rock trying to piece the show together while it's falling apart. As cast and crew members become increasingly difficult to handle, Lorne struggles to get the show ready by its deadline, leading to conflicts that could prevent them from going live at all. So it's a Saturday Night Live origin story back when it was still called Saturday Night. The movie is molded around the race against the clock trope. Lorne has 90 minutes to get the show ready, which becomes increasingly improbable as conflicts ensue between the cast and crew, especially with a group of unruly misfits in the mix. It is a real-time movie, so the moment that Lorne says, "We go on in 90 minutes, the events of the movie do play out in exactly 90 minutes before the show airs. The movie will periodically have timestamps in an attempt to make the countdown feel tense, but more than anything, it humorously shows us how much chaos has ensued in the short period between timestamps. This movie is a portrait of how chaotic show business can be behind the scenes. With every show and movie, what the world sees is a beautiful and meticulously crafted work of art. But what viewers don't see is the bedlam that sometimes goes on behind the scenes. The chaos of the first SNL production is used as a comedy device. Characters are yelling and swearing, and some of them are incredibly challenging to work with, especially the cast members. The overall hectic situation that Lorne is in is funny on paper, but when the movie is at points of peak pandemonium, I can't say that there's a whole lot of laugh-out-loud humor within that. Almost like Wolf of Wall Street's hectic office scenes, but with much lighter humor. I did get a handful of laughs from this movie, but most of the time it was when the studio wasn't in total uproar. It was when things were a lot more calm. Like it's quiet, and somebody says something. There's a pause, and then a response. And the response is what was funny, but that just speaks to my sense of humor. Comedy is obviously very subjective. We do get to see some of the actual sketches from the first episode, but only during rehearsal, which is probably the best way to depict them in the movie. It certainly would not be an SNL movie if we didn't get to see sketches in some way, but there just probably wouldn't be a good way to implement them in their entirety in the movie. It was still cool seeing how some of them came together. One of them in particular is brilliant. I'll spare you the spoiler though of which one it is. To answer the question of how much humor in the movie is actually funny, I think that the best thing that I could compare this to is a full episode of SNL. If you're like me and you watch a full episode, you won't laugh at the majority of the jokes, but there will be a few jokes that sneak up on you, and that describes my experience with this movie. That's not to say that the movie's humor is anything like SNL though. It's not your ordinary, sanitized network television humor. It's much more inappropriate. Some of the jokes within the sketches feel like generic SNL humor because, it's literally SNL. But the movie depicts them in a clever way that doesn't just feel like they're trying to rehash old sketches for laughs. It's more about how the cast and crew reacted to them during rehearsal. The best thing about this movie is really just seeing depictions of the old guard of SNL being themselves behind the scenes in the show. Seeing characters like Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd being lovably obnoxious and raunchy contributed to some of the movie's best moments. Emphasis on Chevy Chase. He was definitely the standout character. Not only does Corey Michael Smith look so much like Chevy Chase in the 70s, but he perfectly captured his wit and his impeccable comedic timing. It definitely hinges on nostalgia, so if you recognize some of the actors being depicted on screen and that's what you're looking forward to, you'll probably enjoy the movie. For this reason, it probably won't do quite as well with newer generations, so if you don't recognize or even care about some of those cast members, there's probably not much in this movie for you. But I'd like to think that most people who care at all about the entertainment industry will recognize some of these characters, like Jim Henson and George Carlin. The movie is not shy of depicting some of those characters as total douchebags. I'd liken it to how Once Upon a Time in Hollywood depicted Bruce Lee. If you were one of the people who did not like that, then you might feel the same way about the treatment that some of these icons got. Taking place in 1975, the movie not only captures the period's atmosphere, but also some of the social norms that wouldn't be quite as welcome nowadays. Just some of the ways guys act and speak to women, I definitely wouldn't call any of the depictions sickening or problematic. It's really just a nod to the times. They can be extremely provocative, which makes sense for a group of 70s comedy writers, but the rest of the crew is also a bit old school. So the big issue with this movie is that it was a real-time movie rather than a proper biopic. There's just a lot crammed into such a short amount of time. It's certainly a clever idea to make it entirely about the night of the premiere, and the authenticity of real-time movies tends to look awesome on paper. But in this movie's case, it just didn't really do anything for its story or characters, especially since there are so many. It certainly gave the movie its chaotic vibe, which is fun sometimes, but it's missing some much needed elements to make the whole race against time trope actually feel tense. An important factor in creating tension is by giving us enough time and reason to worry about what's going to happen to the characters. Worry is the key word there. When we worry about how stakes and conflicts might impact our character and we're left in anticipation for too long, tension is created. We don't really worry about characters who we don't care that much about, and this movie is so chaotic that it doesn't really give us much time to care about Lorne. This whole idea for an SNL movie totally could have worked as a proper biopic rather than a real-time movie. Not necessarily a Lorne Michaels biopic, but following the trend of movies like Air and Tetris and the wonderful movie Blackberry, it could have totally worked as a company/product biopic. Even going that route, A Race Against Time could totally work as the pinnacle of the story, like it could culminate with that time leading up to when they go live. It just needed more focus on Lorne and some of the key cast members. It flirts with the idea of giving them more depth without really actually doing so. Like a lot of movies, this one is of course much more about the journey than the destination because, well, we already know about the destination. My experience with it wasn't bad by any means. I got a handful of laughs out of it. It's just not really that interesting of a story, and it's a little bit nostalgia baity. This movie feels like Wolf of Wall Street if it solely took place on Wall Street and didn't give us the important events outside to tie a bow on it. Okay, 2 references to the same movie in one video means it's time to end the review. So it's a mixed bag, but I would rate this at the bottom end of decent movies. It's one that will likely entertain big fans of SNL, but I wouldn't call it the most rewatchable movie. And of course, if you don't really care about any of the comedy icons being portrayed in the movie, you probably won't like it. Thank you for watching this review. If it brought you any value at all, please give it a like. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see you later this week with my review of We Live in Time.